A new Talon Empire begins now.
Hey guys, my name is Mushroom. I have a lot of different names and I just really like lore. So with everything going on with Overwatch and how they've been kind of kicked out of Watchpoint Gibraltar after Onron's comic From the Ashes, the Overwatch world is in kind of a disarray. Talon is seemingly taking over more and more, and we're kind of seeing distrust and disdain towards them from a couple little avenues and places. So I wanted to break down Vendetta's allies, but also talk about the characters in those factions that kind of have even more connections, because Vendetta kind of controls the world right now if you think about it. So, as always, if you like this kind of stuff, don't forget to like and subscribe. All that kind of stuff really helps, and sharing the video as well is just really good to help get growth going. So, I really appreciate it. So let's start with breaking down Talon and talking about how many of them have pretty crazy connections, because a lot of their connections and characters in there are really important to the world itself. To start with, we have, of course, in Talon, the playable heroes, and those left in Talon are Mauga, Emre, Freja, Moira, and of course Vendetta, and Domina to an extent. So with Mauga, we'll start with him because he has the least connections compared to most of them here. Mauga has the Deep Sea Raiders. That's the faction Mauga was from in his youth and the faction his dad ran. They were basically a pirate group or kind of a coalition that fought against the governments, at first trying to defend the coral reefs and the oceans of the world, but kind of de-evolved over time into becoming more of a rebel and Splinter Cell faction that kind of took over to an extent. They were shut down and kind of pushed away by Overwatch back in the day, so this faction is probably not really as strong as it was or have many connections as they once did, but Mauga's strength in and of itself is just kind of crazy. He's gone toe-to-toe with Doomfist and Drod, for an example, but, you know, Doomfist isn't really the best example anymore. You know how it is. You know what I mean. Mauga is pretty strong in that regard, so he is really good to have on your side, and he does have connections to at least the Deep Sea Raiders or whatever's left of them. Next up, of course, is Emre. We do know he has a lot of connections to the old Overwatch, but his big connection though, and the one that a lot of people look to, is the Conspiracy, the eye on his chest, and of course, the god AI that's seemingly controlling him to an extent, which is a long-running faction in the Overwatch lore that kind of has moved things around and puppeted the world from the shadows. Sombra was chasing after it and still is, but it looks like Emre is being controlled by them, and maybe being controlled by a god AI, Chernobog, who seemingly takes over him. So those two connections are pretty insane. A god AI having a connection to a hero like this can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an Anubis 2.0 here where they take over the world with an army of robots, but a god AI is still strong in and of itself. Especially Chernobog, who is the god AI of global security. That's kind of a big deal, because they have an eye on most of the world to that extent. But the Conspiracy itself seemingly put Emre here for a reason. He talks about how he's not allowed to leave in-game and how he's kind of forced to be here. And, of course, in his short story with Freja that came out a couple weeks ago, he talks about that if he ever tries to disobey the Eye, he gets basically taken over, and he doesn't remember anything that happened. So he doesn't really have any free will, but the Conspiracy is seemingly backing Vendetta for some reason. I'm hoping we get to see more of this in Season 2, because Emre's whole character and dynamic is really interesting to talk about. So I'm hoping we get to see how he feels about the Conspiracy, and we get the Conspiracy kind of opened a little bit. I think a lot of what makes the Conspiracy work is how little we know about them, so I hope we kind of just pick at it over time until a grand reveal whenever they want to focus on this faction. But that's besides the point. I made a whole video talking about the Conspiracy that you can look at here. Now, for the character of the playable heroes in Talon that has probably the biggest connections, aside from Vendetta herself, which we'll talk about next, is Moira. So Moira is actually a really good and important character to have on your side in this regard, and it was really smart of Vendetta to keep her around. Moira has connections to not only Overwatch, not only most of the global world, because a lot of people know her science and a lot of her research in general is kind of just widespread, but of course, she has connections to Oasis, which seemingly has connections to the Conspiracy, and most of the scientific world, aside from the arcology. Oasis is kind of a haven for a lot of scientific collectives and academies to grow, so there is a lot of there and a lot of research that can be done that Moira gets away with as one of the heads of Oasis. Even with the other heads of Oasis though, I don't think she has full control of them. We get to see how she butts heads with the Minister of Geology back in Hazard's launch period, so it doesn't really seem like she has the best kind of control over Oasis, but she does have a little bit, and I think that goes a long way, especially getting her connections with Helix involved as well. Moira was working with Helix to an extent to kind of develop technology to create global weaponry out of the orb or the vanadium that Hazards kind of stole from Oasis. The Minister of Geology had no idea she was really talking with Helix doing this, so she has a connection there that is probably going to be coming up in Season 2 to an extent when the heist happens at the Overwatch base, which I'll talk about a little bit here real quick. Season 2 is probably going to be focusing on this base, since we find out in Vengeance Comes that Moira wants something from Watchpoint Grand Mesa, and the Grand Mesa is currently controlled by Helix. So I wouldn't be surprised if Moira kind of comments on her relationship with Helix, but also we get a little hero teaser out of it, and maybe that's a way we can connect this to Talon, because maybe there's something we don't really know going on there. But once again, that's a video for another day. I want to focus more on what we actually know about Vendetta's allies and everything with that. So, Moira has a lot of connections to the greater world, it seems, and everything is kind of going her way for now. But we've seen her butt heads with Vendetta, so I'm wondering how those two are going to feel about each other in the long term, because I'm not sure how long that's going to last. And lastly, for the playable heroes is Vendetta. Vendetta is obviously the leader of Talon, but also has connections to mainly stuff in the Colosseo and Rome. She's kind of built an empire there, and we get to see it in her original comic, A New Empire, that she literally built up an empire from the ashes, and has made the gladiators of the Colosseo her subjects, and they all work as her private army, and I would say now probably work as the elite of the elite in Talon, the kind of heads that they deserve for being loyal to Vendetta for so long. So Vendetta does have her own personal army here, and controls most of Rome to an extent. She's also talked with many political leaders across the globe, such as everything with Vishkar, which we'll be talking about in a little bit with Domina, but Vishkar, of course, is just one of her many allies that we know about. So, with all the playable heroes out of the way, I do want to talk about Maximilien for a minute, because he's probably the most important Talon member who's not a hero, and in fact, probably the most important political person in terms of global power in this group. In Maximilien's short story we got a little while ago, we get to see that he basically controls all of Europe, or has a hand in most of Europe, but almost fully controls Monte Carlo, which of course is where his casino is, but where he mainly works out of. With all of this in mind as well, he controls many industries across all of Europe, but is basically the one that's kind of backing Vendetta the most, I would say, aside from Vishkar. He seems to be the one that's really pulling the strings and getting her moving across the globe, and it's kind of a genius move that he convinced her to let him live and join her, because, well, he is kind of the master card in this, I would say. Of course, Vendetta would definitely be able to do this without him, but with Max on her side, things have definitely gone quicker and probably led to a lot of growth in a lot of areas. Rialto, as an example, is probably one that Max kind of helped her get a push in, but Vendetta, of course, already had a pretty big leverage there with all the Talon connections, but Max definitely helped along the way, I would say, to an extent. And of course, she probably controls Monte Carlo now, because Talon always kind of did thanks to Max's connection, but that's just another example of a place she most likely controls now. So Maximilien is kind of crazy if you think about it. He's got a lot of connections that we don't even really know about, so he's probably the most influential character in Talon aside from Vendetta. The other thing you have to mention when you talk about Max as well is, of course, Freja. Freja has a ton of connections on her own. I mean, we've seen it all with her origins, and of course everything that happened with her launch period, where she went around the world getting different bounties. So she has a lot of connections to a lot of different places, and she's probably one of the best bounty hunters in the world. She can probably find anyone and anything that Max needs, so that's a really big boon to him as well. In fact, of the people that are on Vendetta's new council, Max is bringing a lot of the heavy weight with Emre and Freja, so Freja is pretty important to Max's power in Talon as a whole. Now, let's move on to all of Vendetta's allies, because, oh boy, she has a lot. The first one, of course, is Domina and Vishkar. We've talked about Vishkar in a couple different videos now, but the biggest key takeaway with Vishkar is they kind of have locations all across the globe. And while their reputation isn't the best, they do have at least a foothold in a lot of major cities. They've tried to have locations in Rio, they even have locations in Kings Row, they've had places everywhere it feels like. So they have a pretty global footprint on the world, and Vendetta using that to her advantage is kind of genius. Domina is giving Vendetta and Talon soldiers shield tech to make them stronger, and in turn, Vendetta is giving Vishkar leeway to kind of rebuild and take the good PR hit for when Vendetta does something dirty. This is a really good deal for everything going on with Vishkar, because, well, Vishkar isn't in the best place politically, and also public perception is pretty bad. We get to hear about it through a couple ways, such as everything going on with Lifeweaver, of course Lucio and how he's beloved and fighting back against this empire, and, surprisingly, everything that happened in London Calling as well. A lot of all these issues kind of build up and just kind of exploded in Vishkar's face, so Domina's been trying to really push back on that, and thanks to her allying with Talon and not letting the world know about that, that's seemingly going to be how they get back in the limelight, so their empire is probably going to grow as well. Next up, of course, is the Hashimoto. So we don't really know a lot about how this relationship is working between Vendetta and the Hashimoto, but we do know it's at least a decent partnership where most of the Hashimoto are working with her. We've learned through in-game interactions that everything going on in Kanezaka is kind of a sub-branch of the main Hashimoto, with the leader there not really being connected to anyone else. He's kind of doing his own thing in the corner, so we're going to put him to the side and kind of talk about the grander scope of the Hashimoto. The Hashimoto so far, we don't really have a ton on. We know they're run by a group of elders, and we've gotten to see a couple of them in Hanzo's short story from Heroes Ascendant, where Honor lives. We know that they all wear the kind of mask motif as well, and that they have Toshiro held hostage. So Toshiro is making Anima tech weapons forcefully for them, and Vendetta's probably going to be augmenting some of her soldiers with that if I had to guess, but that's kind of besides the point. The Hashimoto are seemingly taking over Japan with Vendetta's help, so it all goes hand in hand to really make their empire kind of grow and give them even more political gain from all this. The Hashimoto are kind of seen as a laughingstock, not only in kind of the fandom, but also just in the greater Overwatch world. They're a very minor faction, so Vendetta and Talon kind of backing them is going to help them a lot, and give them a lot of leeway to kind of become a bigger deal in the grander scope of things. So I'm interested to see where that goes as well. We're probably going to be seeing more of that in Season 3, but those are all of Vendetta's core allies out of the way now, but of course I want to mention her kind of partnership and not really allies is of course the Deadlock Rebels. So, the Deadlock Rebels are something I don't think I have to talk about too deep here. I feel like everybody has a really good idea of them, but Ashe, Bob, and all of them are currently in the Deadlock Rebels, and they're working alongside Talon to help them invade Watchpoint Grand Mesa. But I think something important to point out here is Ashe is not doing this to join Talon, she's doing this because they got paid. And they're kind of just a gang that kind of does this for the money. So I don't think Ashe is making a statement here or joining a side or anything with the Rebels. However, I think this does go to show that Vendetta's not afraid to kind of ally with people, no matter what, even if they just want monetary gain, with a lot of these factions seemingly wanting. And it kind of goes hand in hand as to what exactly does Vendetta want. But with all that out of the way, I think I'll talk about the hypothetical partner that she really wants to get apparently. She wants to get the Junkers on her side. So, in Vengeance Comes, we get to see that Mauga is being sent to Junkertown to convince the Junkers to join Talon, or at least partner with them like the Deadlock Rebels. This, I don't think is going to go her way. The Junkers are not really a faction that kind of agrees with any kind of power or system in place. They kind of agree with themselves and everything that the Queen really says. So you would have to get Junker Queen on your side, and I really don't think Queen is going to be working with anyone inside of Talon. In fact, maybe this is the time where the Queen's finally going to launch her own operations, since she does have that airship thanks to Junkrat's treasure. Junkrat's treasure was revealed a little bit ago now in Heroes Ascendant to be a giant airship from the Crisis. They've been rebuilding it in the background this whole time with the help of Wrecking Ball, so that's probably going to be something we see at least mentioned again in the future. But I don't see the Junkers really joining Talon anytime soon. All of them don't really support them. I could see, though, if they want to go some fun, interesting way, maybe Junkrat and Roadhog get paid to work with them, kind of like the Deadlock Rebels. We know Junker Queen and Wrecking Ball probably wouldn't, but Junkrat and Roadhog, of course, really do kind of work a lot for money. We've seen them work with kind of shady figures in the past, and even in Junkrat's original comic, worked with a businessman that wasn't exactly the best. So maybe that could be something they do if they want to bring some of these characters in. Get Junkrat and Roadhog to kind of be allied with Talon, just for the money though, not really being there for actual support of Vendetta. And that's kind of all of Vendetta's major plays across the world. If you kind of look at it in the grander scale, she basically has hands in every major continent and every major location across the globe. This is kind of crazy thinking about because, well, aside from Null Sector, which we assume is in Antarctica based on all the stuff with reconciliation, there's no real power that's as big as Talon right now. Overwatch has only a couple agents and they're currently on the run, and Vendetta seemingly has a hold everywhere. So, yeah, what do you guys think about Vendetta's allies? Are there any characters that you guys would love to see Vendetta ally with, or at least make a partnership with? There's a lot of factions that we haven't really gotten to see or talk about yet in the lore, such as the Lunar Space Apes. Personally, I would love to see them get involved somehow, not exactly sure how or when, but it would be really fun if Vendetta tried to reach out to them and kind of weaponize them like she's doing with Sigma. So Sigma's in a weird place where he used to have a lot of connections, obviously, but he doesn't really have any now. His strongest connection is probably Sombra or Moira currently, and Sombra's not going to be joining her or Talon anytime soon, and Moira already doesn't really view him as anything more than a weapon, alongside Vendetta, who also views him as that, so a lot of his older connections probably don't really matter anymore. In fact, they probably don't even really use him to the full extent that they could, like Doomfist did, so I don't really see him being useful in any real way, aside from maybe just kind of being a powerful weapon, which that makes me want to put him more inside of Vendetta's arsenal than in his own category here, which is why I didn't really think about bringing him up before. But what factions do you guys want to see? I tried to mention as many as I could here, but of course, I always love reading your guys' comments. Anyways, that's all from me in this one. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye!